You've definitely heard the term toxic masculinity thrown around, right? But how do you actually measure something like that? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the science, the really meticulous, data-driven process of building a brand new tool designed to do exactly that.
So, let's just start with the biggest question. Once you get past all the noise on social media, what does toxic masculinity actually mean to a scientist? See, for researchers, you just can't measure what you can't define, and that's pretty much where this whole journey has to begin.
Think about it. To study any idea in psychology, whether it's anxiety or happiness, scientists first need a really clear, consistent, and data-backed definition. They can't just go with whatever is popular at the moment. So the first mission for this research team was to build that solid foundation from scratch. And this is the definition they landed on. Now, what's really important here is that this wasn't just made up. They used what's called a grounded theory approach. That basically means they dug into qualitative surveys and looked for common themes in how real people were describing the concept. So this definition, it grew directly out of the data itself. Okay, so you've got a definition. Great. But that brings up the next massive hurdle. How do you actually measure it? This is a huge deal in social science because you can have the best theory in the world, but if you don't have the right tool to measure it, your research is just not going to be reliable.
And it all comes down to this one crucial word, validity. Think of it like this. A valid thermometer measures temperature, right? Not your height. In psychology, it's the same thing. A valid scale has to measure the exact thing it says it's measuring and nothing else. If it doesn't, your results are, well, pretty much useless.
And this is the exact problem these researchers wanted to fix. For a long time, studies looking into toxic masculinity had to use what are called proxy instruments, basically scales that were designed to measure something similar, but not quite the same. It's kind of like trying to measure room in feet and inches using a meter stick. You might get in the ballpark, but you're not going to be precise, and that lack of precision can mess up the results. The goal here was to build the right ruler for the job.
So how'd they do it? They didn't just wing it. They launched a really rigorous 3-phase mission. This is basically the gold standard blueprint for creating a new psychological scale from the ground up.
And here's what that process looked like. First, they came up with a massive list of potential questions, all based on their initial data. Then, they used some heavy-duty statistical analysis to see which of those questions naturally clumped together into real, meaningful themes. And finally, they tested that final structure again and again to make sure it was scientifically solid. The journey from a big, fuzzy concept to a precision tool is really a story of whittling things down. It all started with a really wide net. 165 different statements, or items, that came straight from the themes they found in those early surveys. The very first filter was human expertise. They got a panel of 6 experts to go through all 165 items. They tossed out anything that was confusing, badly worded, or just didn't quite fit the core definition. This one quality control step narrowed the list down to a much more focused 108 items. And then came the first big data test. They gave that 108-item survey to almost 700 people. By using a cool statistical method, they could see which questions were truly measuring the same underlying ideas. And man, the results were powerful. It slashed the list by nearly 2/3, leaving them with just 35 items.
And finally, after one more round of testing with a whole new group of people, they landed on the final version, a sharp, concise, 28-item scale where every single question had been statistically proven to belong there.
So what do those final 28 items actually measure? Well, the analysis showed that they all grouped together into 4 clear, distinct components, or factors, of what we're calling toxic masculinity.
Let's break these down real quick. First, you have masculine superiority, which is the idea that men are just inherently better or more important than women. Second, gender rigidity, a very strict black and white belief in gender roles. Third is emotional restriction, the classic real men don't cry idea. And finally, repressed suffering, which is all about hiding pain, whether it's physical or emotional, to look tough. And you can see how that one has clear links to real health issues, like guys avoiding the doctor or not getting mental health support.
And here's a cool little behind-the-scenes detail. At first, there was a 5th potential factor they called domination and desire. But during that final testing phase, the data just showed it didn't really fit with the other 4, so they cut it. It's a perfect reminder that this whole process is about following the data, not trying to make the data fit your theory.
All right, so they've built the scale, they've refined it, but now for the million-dollar question, does it actually work? Is this new tool really valid?
So to check this, they compared their new scale, the TMS-28, against other scales that are already well established. And the results? They were exactly what you'd want to see. Scores on the new scale lined up really strongly with scores on scales measuring similar things, like conforming to masculine norms, and, just as important, the scores went in the complete opposite direction of a scale measuring an opposing idea, like liberal feminist attitudes. Long story short, it confirms the tool's hitting exactly the right target.
So let's wrap up the key takeaways here. The researchers started by creating a definition that was actually driven by data. Then they built and refined a 28-item scale, the TMS-28, that measures 4 core factors of that concept. And the big one? Initial tests show it's a solid, reliable, and valid tool for scientists to use.
Now, we have to be honest about a limitation that the researchers themselves point out. Every single participant in this study was a white undergraduate man. That's a really big deal, because it means we can't just assume this scale would work the same way for men from different racial backgrounds, different cultures, or even just different age groups. It's an amazing starting point for sure, but it's not the final word.
And that brings us all the way back to the main point. Why does any of this even matter? Because good science needs good tools. Simple as that. By creating a specific, validated instrument for this one concept, this research helps the entire field move past those less precise proxy tools, which means we can get higher quality, more reliable research in the future.
Which kind of leaves us with this final thought. Now that a more precise tool is out there, what new doors does that open up? What could we learn about the links between these traits and things like men's mental health, their physical health, or the quality of their relationships? And maybe the most interesting question of all, how might those connections look different across all the diverse cultures around the world? That's the next chapter this new tool helps us get ready to write.